Detroit, the summer of 1812. A heavily fortified American garrison sits on the Canadian border. Outside the timber walls, cannons are positioned, packed tightly with grapeshot, fully prepared to shatter any advancing infantry. Yet those cannons never fire. Following the explosion of a single lone British shell inside the fort, the American commander orders the white flag raised. How does a fully equipped, well-supplied American army hand over its territory to a force of equal size without fighting a single genuine battle? While the American forces held a clear material advantage, their sudden capitulation suggests a vulnerability that numbers alone could not protect. This map shows the vast distances of the Northern Campaign during the War of 1812. The American left flank was commanded by General William Hull, a 58-year-old governor who had accepted the post only after immense pressure from the president. Hull had been a capable soldier in his youth, but he felt unequal to the command. In a deeply questionable decision, he also brought his daughter and her 2 young children to share the perils of a frontier military expedition. The logistics of the campaign immediately ground away at his resolve. His column of 1,500 undisciplined Ohio militia had to march 200 miles through untamed wilderness, carving their own path in heavy rain and averaging just 3 miles a day. Compounding his physical exhaustion was a profound failure of government communication. The Secretary of State for War had sent the official declaration of hostilities to a local postmaster via standard mail, with a note asking to please forward. Hull reached the front line entirely unaware that the war had actually begun. Reaching the Maumee River, Hull made a disastrous choice to lighten his column's load. He chartered a schooner heading for Detroit and loaded it with his medical supplies, the officer's baggage, and a trunk containing his army's muster rolls and official campaign orders. The British, who had already received word of the war, simply watched the schooner sail past Fort Malden and seized it. They instantly possessed all of Hull's critical intelligence. By the time Hull finally arrived at the Canadian border, he was physically drained, stripped of his essential supplies, and entirely blind to the actual strength of his enemy. When Hull finally crossed the border into Canada, he set up a position and simply waited. Across the river was British General Isaac Brock, an active and able commander who immediately began rushing reinforcements to the area. Brock quickly realized his core problem. He lacked the absolute numbers needed to crush the American force in a direct assault. To win, he had to launch a targeted psychological operation to break the American general's state of mind. General Brock's very first tactic was visual deception. He gathered local Canadian villagers and dressed them in spare red tunics. From a distance, he paraded them in formation, deliberately tricking Hull into believing he was facing massive ranks of highly trained British regulars. The illusion worked perfectly on the exhausted 58-year-old. Looking across the river, Hull's aging eyes began to hallucinate a vastly superior, highly professional enemy force preparing to slaughter his men. Through these visual ruses, Brock ensured that when Hull looked across the river, he saw not an equal opponent, but an insurmountable one. Brock then escalated his operation with weaponized misinformation. He deliberately allowed a forged letter to fall into American hands. The document falsely claimed that 5,000 Native American warriors were massing at Fort Malden, and that any more reinforcements would be superfluous. This chart compares the reality of the situation to the fiction Brock had created. The actual troop counts were roughly equal, but the perceived threat, inflated British regulars combined with 5,000 warriors, created a massive gulf between reality and perception. Reading the forged intelligence broke Hull entirely. Terrified for the safety of his daughter and grandchildren, he immediately withdrew his army back across the border to American territory, locked himself in a room in Detroit, and refused to see anyone for 4 days. Sensing his opponent was fully primed, Brock deployed his final tactic, a gentleman's threat. Backed by 600 native warriors wearing war paint, Brock requested a parley. Playing the reasonable peer, he warned Hull that once combat began, he would be completely powerless to stop his allies from committing a massacre. Brock connected fabricated threats directly to Hull's deepest fears for his family. The mere anticipation of a massacre proved far more paralyzing than actual combat. The standoff reached its climax outside the stockade at Detroit. As British troops slowly advanced, Hull initially held his ground, placing his cannons outside the fort, fully packed with grapeshot. But as the enemy drew closer, the psychological toll finalized its work. Gripped by panic, Hull abandoned his defensive artillery and ordered his men inside the wooden walls before a single shot was exchanged. Then a single British shell exploded inside the fort, causing a few casualties. Without returning fire, Hull ordered the white flag to be hoisted. The capitulation was so absolute that it trapped American forces who weren't even present. A force of 350 returning American reinforcements arrived at Detroit unaware of the surrender, only to find they were automatically included in it and instantly disarmed. The fall of Detroit was a total collapse of command, executed flawlessly by the British without a single genuine battle line ever being drawn. Looking at this map of the Detroit and Sandwich region, the strategic aftermath is clear. The American invasion of Canada suffered a complete collapse, losing crucial border territory. Upon returning to the United States, Hull was court-martialed for cowardice and sentenced to be shot. President James Madison ultimately intervened, pardoning Hull in recognition of his distinguished record of service decades earlier during the War of Independence. The campaign of 1812 proves a stark reality. Armies wage wars on physical battlefields, but those wars are routinely won or lost in the minds of the commanders. History labeled William Hull a coward, but looking closely at the deliberate, step-by-step psychological dismantling he endured, we have to ask, was he truly a traitor to his country, or merely a deeply outmaneuvered dupe?